Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're really getting into it, going deep into military history with Carl von Clausewitz, his book On War.
Big one.
Yeah, Clausewitz, heavy hitter.
Influential.
So we're in chapter 13 of book 5, and he's talking about cantonments, which, and I think this is really important for our listeners. You're out there serving your country. This is a topic that's as relevant today as it was in the 19th century.
Yeah, I mean, cantonments, it sounds like a very specific term, maybe a little jargony.
A little bit, yeah.
But really what it boils down to is how do you house troops? How do you position troops when they're not actively engaged in combat?
Right, and Clausewitz starts off by kind of setting the stage, right?
Yeah.
Talking about how armies used to operate using tents, bivouacs, those open-air camps. But he's pretty clear that those aren't really a long-term solution.
No, I mean, you can
Mhm.
imagine, right, like just the wear and tear, not even from a combat perspective, but just from the elements, from disease. In the 19th century, when disease was a huge factor in warfare,
Oh, absolutely.
armies were getting decimated, not by the enemy, but by, dysentery and things like that.
Yeah. It's like trying to win a football game when half your team is out with the flu.
Exactly.
And Clausewitz actually uses Napoleon's campaign in Russia as a prime example of this.
Yeah, Napoleon, I mean, marched for months in brutal conditions, and while they had early victories, that wear and tear on the army, the exhaustion, the illness, all contributed to their downfall.
So he's really talking about this balance, right? You need your troops to be rested and ready to go at a moment's notice, but you also need them to be comfortable enough to actually recover.
Yeah, I mean, if they're not sleeping, if they're, getting rained on constantly, they're not going to be effective in a fight. And that's where he introduces this idea of cantonments as a way to kind of thread that needle, to have a more, I guess you could say, semi-permanent or at least a more stable base of operations.
Right, so it's strategic.
Absolutely. It's not just finding a place to sleep for the night. It's about creating a strategic advantage.
And he gets into the specifics of what makes a good cantonment. Like, he really advocates for this compact, circular layout centered around a point of assembly, which, at least to me, seems a little counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you want to spread out your forces to protect a wider area?
You would think so, and that's definitely, a common thought. But he argues that spreading out actually makes you more vulnerable.
Okay.
Because if you spread out too thin, it takes longer to bring your forces together when you need to respond to a threat. Whereas if you're concentrated, you can react much faster. Imagine a wagon wheel.
Okay.
The hub is your point of assembly. You want the spokes to be as short as possible so you can quickly move those forces to where they need to be. And you're stronger, but there's that idea, strength in numbers.
Right, absolutely.
If you're spread out, it's easier for the enemy to kind of pick you off piecemeal.
Yeah, defeat in detail.
Exactly. But if you're concentrated, you're a much more formidable obstacle. And then he goes on to talk about, well, where should you put these cantonments? And he highlights the importance of towns and cities.
Okay, yeah.
Because he says a large town can act as a force multiplier.
Force multiplier, what's that mean, like, in plain English?
So basically, it gives you a significant advantage that you wouldn't have otherwise, because a town already has housing, it has infrastructure, it has resources. You don't have to build all that from scratch.
It's the difference between showing up to a hotel room versus having to build your own campsite.
Exactly. You got it. You can just roll in and you're ready to go. And it frees up your troops to focus on training, on logistics, on being ready to move when the time comes. And it's not just about convenience. Towns and cities also offer really good defensive positions. You've got walls, buildings, narrow streets. All that can be used to your advantage in a fight.
Right, urban warfare, yeah.
Exactly. So choosing the right location is almost as important as the layout of the cantonment itself.
Got it.
And this kind of leads into another important tension that Clausewitz talks about, which is, using cantonments to protect territory versus using them to keep your forces concentrated and ready to strike.
Yeah, that seems like a tough one. Like, how do you balance those two things?
It is. It's a constant balancing act that military leaders have to navigate. Because on the one hand, you've got to protect your people, you've got to hold key terrain, but on the other hand, you don't want to spread yourself so thin that you're vulnerable.
Right, you become an easy target.
Exactly. So how do you find that sweet spot? Well, Clausewitz, he doesn't give us a clear-cut answer because in his mind, there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Yeah, every situation's different.
Exactly. It all depends on the specific circumstances, the enemy you're facing, the terrain, your overall goals. But he stresses the importance of being adaptable, thinking strategically, being able to read the situation and make adjustments on the fly.
Okay, so you got to be able to think on your feet.
Absolutely. And be proactive, right? It's not just about reacting to what the enemy's doing. It's about using your cantonments to support your own offensive operations, setting yourself up for success when the opportunity arises. And to illustrate this, he actually analyzes the 1815 campaign.
Oh, with Napoleon.
Yeah, where the Prussian army, they used their cantonments very effectively to assemble their forces and ultimately defeat Napoleon at Waterloo.
Right, because the Prussians, they were outnumbered in that fight, right?
They were, and they were outmaneuvered at times, but they were able to concentrate their forces very quickly thanks to their cantonments, and that allowed them to join up with the British and secure the victory. It's a great example of what Clausewitz calls the culminating point of victory.
Okay, now I've got to ask, because I've never heard that term before, the culminating point of victory. What does that even mean?
So it's kind of a complex idea, but essentially it means that every attack, every offensive, eventually loses momentum. The attacker gets weaker, the defender gets stronger, so the key is to strike when you're at your strongest, then transition to a defensive posture before that advantage slips away.
Ah, okay, I'm starting to see it. So cantonments can play a key role in that because they allow you to preserve your strength, keep your supplies flowing, and then choose the time and place of the engagement.
Exactly. It's like playing chess. You're thinking several moves ahead, and you're using your cantonments to outmaneuver your opponent.
So it's about the long game. It's about using every tool at your disposal.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that's a recurring theme in On War. Clausewitz, he's all about intelligence. He's all about strategy. He's saying that warfare is not just about brute force. It's about being smart.
And cantonments, even though they might not seem glamorous, they're a vital part of that equation.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to note that while the technology of warfare has changed a lot since the 19th century, a lot of these fundamental principles that Clausewitz talks about, they're still relevant today.
So for our listener out there who's maybe prepping for a deployment right now, what would you say are the biggest takeaways? Like, what should they really be thinking about?
I think one of the most important things is to remember that the challenges of warfare, they haven't really changed that much.
Okay.
You still need to think strategically about how to protect your troops, how to keep up morale, how to set yourself up for success. So even though we're talking about 19th century military theory, these lessons are still applicable in the 21st century.
They're timeless in a way.
Exactly. And maybe even more importantly, you need to be adaptable. Because, as Clausewitz says, there are no hard and fast rules in warfare. Things change, situations change, and you've got to be able to roll with the punches.
You got to be able to think on your feet.
Exactly. You can't just memorize a playbook. You've got to be able to read the situation and make the right call under pressure.
Which, takes experience, it takes knowledge, it takes a lot of courage, too.
Absolutely. And I think another thing that's really important, and Clausewitz emphasizes this a lot, is the human element. Always remember that these are real people we're talking about, with families, with lives, with hopes and dreams.
It's easy to forget that when you're talking about strategy and tactics and all that. But at the end of the day, it's people who are fighting these wars.
It is. And I think recognizing that human element, remembering that, is essential for any leader at any level, whether you're a general or a sergeant.
Absolutely. Well, we've covered a lot of ground here today, talking about cantonments and Clausewitz. What would you say, for our listener who's getting ready to go out there and serve, what's the most important takeaway from all of this?
I think if you're looking for the key to what Clausewitz is really getting at, it's the importance of strategic thinking. In all aspects of warfare, not just cantonments. Don't just react. Don't just follow orders blindly. Understand the why behind the what.
Be proactive.
Exactly. Be proactive. Think several steps ahead. Anticipate the challenges. Look for every advantage you can get.
Don't underestimate the little things.
Yeah, the logistics, the morale, all those things that maybe don't sound as exciting as, charging into battle, but they often determine who wins and who loses.
The unsung heroes of warfare.
That's a good way to put it.
Well, on that note, I think we're going to have to wrap up this deep dive into cantonments. We hope this has given you, the listener, a new way of thinking about military operations, the strategy behind them, both back then and what's going on today.
Yeah, hopefully something to ponder while you're out there.
Exactly. Thank you for listening, and until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.